welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am doing my December wrap-up. So just a heads up, this is the first video that I am doing since the 12 Days of Christmas is over, and some of these books did make it into my top and bottom lists for the year. Some of them were part of a wrap-up for my Reader Rid project, so some of these books you've definitely heard me talk about before. If you haven't watched those videos, then this will be all new for you. I'm going to go in the order that I finished these books because that was just easier than trying to figure it out otherwise. So the first book that I finished in the month of December was actually a book that I started in November for Nonfiction November, and that is The Romanov Sisters by Helen Rappaport. This book is amazing. I actually really wanted to pick up this book kind of for a while. I've owned it for about a year, and I had even put it on my nonfiction TBR for the year, but just hadn't felt motivated to pick it up. In October, I read Romanov by Nadine Brandes, and that's kind of like a fantastical reimagining of the last days of the Romanov family. And so I was really motivated to pick up this book afterwards because I just wanted to know more. And incidentally, this book is actually noted in the author's note at the end of Nadine Brandes' book because she used this book for her research about the family. So that made me want to pick it up even more. I am someone who kind of struggles reading historical nonfiction often just because I feel like maybe I need to absorb more of it, pay more attention, or it's just written too dryly for me. There's a number of reasons where I have not felt motivated to pick up nonfictions before or felt intimidated by them. And that just kind of all went out the window with this book. I absolutely loved it. I feel like the author did such an amazing job of intertwining, firsthand accounts along with the Romanov sisters and their parents, actual letters and diary entries, which made me feel like I really knew them, which made the ending super tragic. And now I want to read more about Nicholas and Alexandra. I mean, they are greatly referenced in this book because the first chapter is actually the two of them meeting, falling in love, getting married, and all those kinds of things. I felt like it was really detailed, really good, but I want to kind of know more about Nicholas and Alexandra and, why the revolution happened, because Nicholas just seems like such a nice guy. I'm not saying he didn't make mistakes, but he was such a family man and super invested in his children's lives and such a good dad. He really loved his kids and made sure to prioritize spending time with them and investing in them in a way that was incredibly uncommon to the royal families at the time. And in fact, pretty much everyone thought that Nicholas and Alexandra didn't behave like royals because they spent too much time with each other and with their children. So it was just really interesting to see that in this time period and in this family. I interchanged reading physically with the audiobook, so I did both and really loved both and kind of gave myself the permission to just enjoy the book and not feel like I have to take notes and absorb every detail, because sometimes I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do. And I don't know if maybe that's like this school type mentality or something. Like if you're reading a book for school and it's historical, you need to be taking notes because this will be on the test later. So I don't know, maybe that is why I have that mentality, but I'm learning to let go of it. And it's okay if I don't retain all the information. I can read more about it at another pass and be able to build on a foundation of knowledge that I already have. I don't have to know all the things to be able to say that I've read a book. Anyway, sorry, that was kind of a little bit of a soapbox moment, I guess, but it was also a realization for me. So anyways, moving on, the next two books that I completed were both on my Reader Rid project and were slated for December. And the first one, unfortunately, made it on my worst books of the year, and it was not number one for the very worst book of the year. I'm trying to remember exactly what place it was. It was either in third or fourth place. It was pretty high up there, and that's The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I was so disappointed by this book. Oh my goodness. I'd go into lots of details, but it's spoilery. If you want spoilers, you could check out my worst video of the year because I did go into spoilers in that, and I'm not going to here, but this is a story essentially of two families. So one family, the patriarch of the family owns this land and this house, and the patriarch of the other family wants it. So he basically frames the guy and says that he is guilty of witchcraft, and this is in the time period of kind of like Salem witch trial kind of era. And so he's put to death, and the other guy just takes his land in his house. And so it's following these two families generations later, the fallout and the impact that have happened because of that action, and then some other things that have happened a couple generations ago that we go back and visit as well. And so there's a lot of components to it that I thought sounded really interesting, and that's the main reason why I stuck with this book and ended up finishing it, was because I was like, well, there are nuggets that are interesting, but this was super wordy. I feel like this might have been better as a short story because I just felt like it was really, really long and very wordy, and I didn't feel like most of the characters got any actual like real character development, and the only character that I even liked in this book was Hephzibah, which is like the spinster sister who is living in the house of the seven Gables at the opening of the book. And I don't know, I just felt like it wasn't good, and there were elements that were nonsensical, and it just wasn't an enjoyable read for me, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure I gave it 1 star. Like, I really didn't like it. I had a much more positive experience with the other book that was on my Reader Read project for the month of December, and that is To Stay Alive by Skila Brown. This is a YA free verse novel about the Donner Party, and it was really interesting. I felt like it was really well done. It's very emotional, and it's really interesting the way that it's laid out with its free verse, and sometimes things are differently shaped. I don't know if I'll get any of those on the page, but you know, you start out and it's very descriptive about their journey going west, about their hopes, about what they're hoping to achieve, and then you get kind of, you know, more towards the end and the poems become very sparse, the way that they're laid out, and you can feel the dread, you can feel the bleakness, you can feel the desperation of their situation communicated in very little words. And I just really, really liked it. And apparently the person that this book is based off of is a real person who actually did survive with the Donner Party, and there's even like a picture of her in the back and a little bit more information about her. So I thought that this was excellent. Were parts of it a little gruesome? Yes, but I did not feel like it was over the top. I didn't feel like it was super disgusting. I mean, if you know about the Donner Party, you kind of know that it's gonna be kind of gross, but I didn't feel like it was at all like over the top or gratuitous. The next book on this list is actually the last book that's like really a solid book that I finished. My reading fell off big time the last couple of weeks of December. It was super busy. We had lots of family coming in, both sides of the family at different times, kind of spread out. So the last 2 weeks of December, we had people in town almost the entire time. And anytime I had some downtime, I was filming or editing for the 12 Days of Christmas. So I didn't get a lot of reading done the second half of the month, but before we got to that point, I did read Coldblooded Myrtle by Elizabeth C. Bunce. This is book 3 in the Myrtle Hardcastle series, and I buddy read this with my friend Jess and Rainy from Rainy Day Reads, and that was just so fun. I love this series. This is a great series. I'm trying to figure out how much I can say about this book without it being spoilery, like kind of buzzword elements that are part of it. So there is some modern day murder things that are going on that connect to a cold case that was never solved from long before Myrtle was born, with people that her mother knew. And her mother has passed away and has not been present in any of the books because she passed away when Myrtle was very young. And so it's just very interesting. There's a lot of components that are so fun, and I guessed some of the ending. I kind of knew who was behind some of it, but it was just a blast. And this is such a fun book because it's set in the Victorian period, and so there's just a lot of things that are very different back then. And all of the books have this, where if they're using a word that's not common anymore, or practices that are not common anymore, there's actually a footnote. And some of them are funny and some of them are really useful. And so I love that. Myrtle is just this brilliant little girl who kind of keeps finding herself in these crime-solving positions, but she's not mad about it because she's actually kind of obsessed with that kind of stuff because her dad is kind of like a judge or a prosecutor or something like that. So it's really interesting. She's precocious. She's brilliant. She reminds me a lot of Flavia de Luce, but I didn't like Flavia as a character, and I thought her family dynamic was super dysfunctional and irritating. And so Myrtle takes the best parts of the Flavia de Luce series, and all the parts that aren't good in that series are done better here. So I really recommend the series. I think it's so fun. Okay, so like I said, after that, my reading kind of fell off. So I did have one daily reading that I did throughout most of December, and that is this book, Joy to the World. These are excerpts from Charles Spurgeon's Christmas sermons. And let me tell you, they're awesome. They're so good. I really wanted something that kind of made me slow down and kind of soak in the Advent season and kind of the celebration of the anticipation of the coming of Christ. And this was perfect for that. I had a super busy December, but this gave me like this moment to like pause and take a breath every single morning and read it. And I just enjoyed it so much. I love Spurgeon anyways, but this was just so wonderful. Highly recommend it for you to use next year if you're interested in that at all. I also read a very small short story collection, A Christmas Memory by Truman Capote. I actually read this, all of it, on Christmas Day because it got to Christmas. I'm like, oh, I haven't picked that up yet. And then I was like, today's really the last day that I feel like I should be reading this because it's Christmas Day. So I read all three of them in here. A Christmas Memory is the first one. And then after that, we have One Christmas and then Thanksgiving Visitor. So these are interesting because they're basically kind of memoir-ish. They're about Truman Capote's own childhood. I'm sure maybe there's some embellishments and things in there, but he was mostly raised at a young age by his extended family, so aunts and uncles, because his parents kind of couldn't get it together, to be honest. So there's the One Christmas one, that second short story. He goes to be with his dad for Christmas, and his dad is like really selfish and terrible, and it's just not a great situation. I actually very actively disliked that story. The other two stories have a lot to do with him and this older cousin who's like in her 60s, who is his close friend, and you kind of get the impression that maybe she has like some mental disabilities because she seems just as childlike as 6 or 7-year-old Truman is. He's called Buddy in the book though. But yeah, so the first one is like about them at Christmas time, and then the Thanksgiving Memory is about like him and this bully from his school, and then his cousin coming in and kind of trying to help with that situation. And I have to say, in all three stories, I found the writing like really compelling and just sucked me in, and I've really enjoyed his writing style so much. So I think that on Goodreads, I'm trying to remember if I gave this 3 stars or 4 stars, because I'm not sure, because I didn't like super love any of them. I found the first and last story to be pretty enjoyable, and the middle story I found to be pretty irritating, but I loved the writing style in general, so I'm for sure not at all unhappy that I read it. And then the last book that I read in December is actually, I think it's 2 novellas that are kind of in the same book, and that's Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, I think. The cover will be up here. This is translated from the Japanese, and both stories are very much about grief and loss and kind of finding a place of belonging. So the title story, Kitchen, is about this young girl who has lost most of her family members, and she has just lost her last living family member, her grandmother. And so she's kind of floundering and grieving and just not sure where she's gonna go, what she's going to do. And this boy comes to her, and he worked at the florist shop that her grandmother frequented and really loved her grandma. And so he invites her to come live with him and his transgender mother, which is really interesting because this book was written in the 80s. And so I feel like even though lots of people would probably have an issue with how the mother was portrayed in this book, it was probably very progressive for its time. So really all three of them are living in this house, and they all just are dealing with loss and grief, and there are other things that happen later in the story. And so it's really just a story about grief and love and grieving, sometimes together and sometimes separately, but together, like side by side. You're grieving different things. Maybe you're not talking about everything, but you also don't feel alone because you can see that you're not the only one who is struggling. And so I felt like a lot of it was really beautiful. I felt like a lot of it, well, not a lot of it, but some of it just didn't feel like it translated super well. Both the emotional side and certain references that it made, and even just the fact that there's this kid that worked at this florist shop who just invites you to come live with him, and you've never met him before, and you're like, sure, yeah, that sounds good. Like, that sounds dangerous, actually. So there are certain things about it that I'm like, I don't know, maybe this is culturally more acceptable than I think it is. I don't know. The second story was different but similar in that it's, you know, two people who have lost people that they love and just are kind of walking through that together. I think I actually might have liked the second one better than the first one, but overall they're very emotional, reflective, kind of short but slow-paced novellas. Oh, and I should also mention that I started Demons by Fyodor Dostoevsky in December, and this is the 3-month read-along that I am participating in. So I did not finish it in December, and that was never the plan. The unfortunate thing is I picked this up for reading sprints, so we did at the beginning of the month, and then I didn't pick it up again because I was trying to finish December reads, and then I got super busy with all the other things, and so I'm still not that far into it. So that's unfortunate. I really need to do some catch up on this, but I am enjoying it so far. So far, I really could not tell you all that much about what it's about. Like, it's about a certain guy and his friends, but like I don't know where this is going, and I haven't like read the introduction or anything because I do not like to be spoiled for books before I read them, even if they're classic books. So I tend to go back and read the introduction after I finished the book. But yeah, I did start this in December but didn't complete it. But if you saw my January wrap up or the Demons announcement, then you already know that I wasn't gonna finish this in December, but I do want to mention that I did start it. Oh my gosh, you guys. I forgot to tell you the first book that I read this month. I'm so glad that I brought in my reading journal because this is a book that I read digitally, which I did the same with Kitchen, but because since that is the last book of the month, it was easier for me to remember. The first book that I finished this month was actually The Price of Spring by Daniel Abraham, and I totally forgot about it because I don't have the physical copy. So this is, like I said, the final book of the Long Price Quartet, which I started reading, I think, in June. It's a really interesting series. It is very different from other fantasy series that I've read because it's very slow paced and very methodical. It has a magic system that is very different from other magic systems that I have seen. It's very Asian inspired, it's very political, and we follow basically really the same kind of two characters and then other people who are associated with them over the course of their lives. So we meet the two main characters when they're children in the prologue, and then we continue to connect with them throughout the rest of the first book when one of them is kind of a teenager and one is more like a young adult, so they're pretty young. And then in between each book, there is a time gap of 15 years. So you're really seeing them throughout their entire lives, which is super interesting and very unique, and I think really sets the series apart. Absolutely loved the first book. The second book, not so much. The third book was really good, but then I read The Price of Spring, and The Price of Spring blew me away. And I am not one of those people who is like, you should stick with this even if you're not enjoying it, because it's when you read the whole series that it all comes together. But this is one that is really true. Although I will say that if you didn't like the first book, then you probably don't need to continue. But if you read one of the middle books and you're a little less sure and you're like, I don't know, this wasn't as good, then I would encourage you, if you want to stick with it, because I do feel like book 4 brings everything full circle in a really deep and meaningful way. And I cried at the end, and it was just, oh, it was so good. I feel like this has kind of been a scattered wrap up, so I'm sorry. I guess that's what happens. Normally I keep all my physical books together, and I really did kind of want to do vlog style like I did in November, because then I can talk about books as I read them and I remember them and I remember the details I want to talk about in them. But I just didn't have like the space on my phone to be pre-filming a bunch of stuff for the 12 days of Christmas and also be vlogging every book that I read. So that was the main reason why I didn't do that. Maybe we'll have return of a vloggy update for January wrap up, but I haven't quite decided yet, so we'll see. Anyway, I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. If you've read any of the books that I read this month, I'd love to chat with you about them. And then I would also love to hear what was your favorite book that you read in December. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again